Hello, and welcome to another episode of Chatter. On today's show, we're talking to Lisa Maria Neudert from the Computational Propaganda project. Now, they've been doing a lot of work over the last year looking at how bots can affect and influence elections. They've looked at Germany, at France, the UK, the US, and have been looking at Facebook and Twitter especially. We had a really interesting conversation about the way bots can be used online, how they differ on different platforms, and how we can fight back against their influence. Today's podcast is sponsored by Unison. Unison are currently fighting proposed budget cuts to the Northern Ireland Health Service that would amount to around £70 million across the whole country. They're currently running a petition to Richard Pengelly to ask the trusts to stand up and refuse to make the cuts that could cost a lot of lives and see cuts to a lot of frontline services. So if you want to sign the petition, you'll find it in the link below. So without further ado, let's get on with the podcast. So Lisa Maria, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Hi.
Yeah, nice to have you after, we didn't quite get there yesterday.
No, but today's going to be a better day.
I hope so. So, do you want to start by sort of going through a little bit about what the Computational Propaganda project is?
Absolutely. So we have been a project since 2012 already, and we are looking into digital propaganda. So propaganda that is happening online and that is happening with a little bit of a different dynamic than propaganda offline has been happening. That is the aspect that's computational. So the propaganda we're looking at is automated propaganda. And with that, it potentially reaches more people, and it also is potentially faster than propaganda before.
Okay, so you're looking at basically modern versions of people putting out adverts or paying people to speak on the streets.
Exactly. That's parts of what we're looking at. So when people talk to us, we often get, but propaganda is nothing new, and propaganda is something that is as old as politics itself. And yes, absolutely, that's right. But with propaganda on social media and in the digital sphere, the methods of propaganda have really changed. So on the one hand, now if you want to do propaganda, you can do big data propaganda. So by that, I mean that you actually know things about the people you want to reach. You know what they like on social media, and you know what they spend their time on. You know what they've clicked like before. So that is one method that is different. And the other method is the automation. And by that, I mean that a propaganda is using automation for the creation and also for the dissemination of content. And with that, I mean, for example, social bots that are pumping out and generating messages. With that, I also mean automated advertising systems that can be used to target users. There's really plenty of things happening online right now that we know very little about still. And that is what we're trying to shed some light on as a project.
Yeah, there's a lot of quite scary things going on, because I think the most terrifying part of it is the fact that whilst bots can be like identified if you know what you're looking for, or if you're looking closely at what's going on, but bots can seem just like a normal person to just your layman looking at a Twitter feed, and you might see, I don't know, a certain hashtag going up and just see it as trending, and that's all you see. But then, suddenly that issue has been pushed way further up the agenda, or, people are outraged about like a certain topic or a certain action, that it can make it look like there's a lot more sort of, just outrage and controversy around something.
Really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what it has the effect of kind of skewing what the public thinks the public are thinking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for bringing it up, because actually one of the biggest misconceptions I find myself explaining is that bots are basically robots sitting behind a computer and typing away and directly communicating with people. And while that is something that bots do, so yes, bots communicate with users directly and pretend to be human users. A lot of what bots do is actually manufacturing a consensus by engaging with content on social media. And what I mean by that is that, for example, they press like, they comment a lot of things. They pretend to generate user activity, and if bots then actually do that, then that in turn games algorithms, because algorithms, when they see, oh, this is a piece of content that seems to be very well liked among users right now, then those social media algorithms will give more prominence to that piece of content by either putting it up on the newsfeed or by putting it in the trending topics, and that then in turn is something that users will see. And the other thing that you were talking about is the social information aspect of it. So we as users, when we are looking at a piece of information, automatically and subconsciously, when we see that other users have been interested in it and have engaged with it, we tend to give a little bit more of our attention to that piece of content. And that sounds strange. And also people say, like, that is something that would not influence me. But if you're thinking, for example, when you're at a museum and there's a painting that maybe lots of tourists are taking pictures from at this moment, then probably you also think this is an important picture and this is like an important great work of art. I should have a look at it. And that's basically what is happening online too. And that's not something that you actively think about and maybe make a well thought through decision, but something that is happening much more subconsciously.
Well, yeah, I guess it's difficult if you just see things trending to sort of discern between which is being put up there by Twitter bots and which is being put up there by actual people.
Yeah. And it gets even more problematic when not just regular users are being tricked, but when journalists and politicians actually are looking at social media and trending topics to find out what is happening in the public agenda right now. There's some really interesting research on this by my alma mater in Germany, actually. Christoph Neuberger has found that journalists in Germany are looking to Twitter when they're doing research and also when they're trying to find topics for what they should report on for the day. And then it gets even more problematic if then those opinion leaders and influencers don't know that bots are actually on social media and are trying to manufacture that consensus and then carry out this agenda from social media into the public sphere and even wider. So it's a multiplier problem.
Yeah, it's. Do you know who first came up with the idea actually? What of putting bots on, or well, of using bots for propaganda?
Well, bots are actually almost as old as Twitter itself, and there's plenty of cool and fun bots, but also there's the kind of propaganda bots that we are looking at, and the examples of bots also go back to something like 2012. For example, there were bots during Arab Spring that was especially interesting when people try to organize on the ground via social media and try to communicate and to coordinate in the Arab Spring. And then the government actually was disseminating messages that were polluting those hashtags that were used for people to coordinate. And for example, they posted random pictures of vacations and expensive cars and whatnot just to pollute those hashtags so that people couldn't organize anymore. So propaganda with bots actually has somewhat of a longer tradition already, given that Twitter and social media are still relatively young, I'd say.
Wow, I did not know that. That is fascinating. So, using bots on social media and to influence political events has been around for what? That's 5 years ago now.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's really something that only became sort of public knowledge around the 2016 election in America.
I think so.
That is.
I think so. So I think the two kind of key events were Brexit and were also the U.S. elections. And I think it's some sort of a waking up that is happening right now. That is also happening in the U.S. right now with Congress questioning Twitter, questioning Facebook about propaganda that might have been on their platforms. And I think it's just increasingly people realizing that social media companies are not just tech companies, but that they're not just media companies either, but that they are really a new kind of form of public forum. And with that comes also threats of propaganda.
Do you think that social media companies should be more, well, not, I don't know what the word is. Do you think they should be clamping down as much as they can on this, so on the sort of bots that are being used? Is there
Um,
anything they can do?
I do understand why it's difficult for social media companies to respond to this because their algorithms are their secret Coca-Cola recipe. And I also do think that many social media companies maybe did not see themselves as the entities that have the responsibility to look into propaganda that is happening on their platforms because they say we are not political. We are providing the technological infrastructure for this, but we in no way see ourselves as the political actors who should control that. And with that, I actually tend to agree with the social media companies that they shouldn't be the political actors that are controlling propaganda and are regulating it. But I do think it's very important that these companies are cooperating with governments and trying to increase transparency of what is going on and what has been going on during past elections, and are trying to find ways of how we can look into this data, how also we as researchers can get this data to just establish more transparency. And then I think from that on, we can try to think about effective countermeasures.
Okay, I've two questions really to follow on from that. Now, I
Mm-hmm.
know surrounding the French and British elections and the US election that Facebook were removing a lot of accounts that they felt to be associated with propaganda, or I think quite a few of them were thought to be associated with specifically more, well, allegedly Russian propaganda.
Mm.
And I know that they've also hired quite a number of fact checkers now to look through stories that get labeled as disputed.
Mm.
And I was wondering whether you thought that was the right move for them to do, especially given that Twitter has done no such thing, and they've just sort of declared that the real time and open nature of Twitter gives it the audience the opportunity to sort of correct itself in real time.
Mm.
And their argument that was that, people might be spreading misinformation, but the new information will always be coming and will always replace the old information.
Yeah.
I was wondering whether you thought that those were reasonable strategies, because Facebook are wanting to try and essentially cut down on fake news or junk news, as you guys use the term, which I love. I think it's so much better than fake news.
Thank you. We think so too.
Yeah, it's so much more perfect. Maybe it's just because I can't imagine Trump calling CNN junk news and therefore just legitimizes it for me.
Mm.
It just makes it seem slightly more real. But yeah, I was wondering essentially if you thought that Facebook had the right idea, or whether you thought Twitter had the right idea, or whether you thought neither of them had the right idea. And yeah, essentially.
So I commend that social media companies are beginning to show more responsibility and are beginning to think how they can better monitor the content and also what they should do about problematic content. So Facebook has said that during the French elections and also the Germany elections, they have taken down thousands of fake accounts. They have not really specified more why they took down those fake accounts. One note on that is also that if Facebook is taking down fake accounts, that in generally helps the public. It's important, but it also helps their advertising revenue, because advertisers hate nothing more than ad fraud. So that means basically bots and fake accounts, fake liking and fake engaging with their advertisement. So they have to pay for impressions on their advertisement that are not actual users. So it's important for Facebook overall to take down fake accounts. And that is also something that they have done before, and not just only now in this political context. I do also think that fact checking is another way, also a way that is gaining a lot of prominence right now. I think after the US elections internationally, fact checking offices and organizations have really mushroomed all over the world. Of course, as you already pointed out, fact checking is difficult because of the dynamics of social media, because it is so real time, and also because debunking stories tend to spread with different dynamics and also in different networks than the original junk stories do. So I do think it is not something that we'll be able to solve overnight. I think there's many different levers that we will have to have a look into. And I think it's going to be the mixture of educating the public, of also regulation, and of also technological solutions to what we're seeing right now, that is eventually going to develop over the next couple of years. But I'm sure that it is going to develop and that it has to.
Yeah, I think the very start of what you're talking about there with the technological developments is the fact that the Facebook Facebook now have an algorithm that sort of trawls news and flags anything that seems like it's not true. I'm not exactly sure how their algorithm works and how they analyze pieces, but it then gets like looked at by human fact checkers in at Snopes or
Yeah, Corrective is their
ABC
German partner, for example. Yeah.
Okay.
So they're trying to re-establish a network of fact checkers worldwide.
Okay. Well, something I actually wanted to ask you about was, I know in Germany the German government put what I think is a 50 million euro fine for people. Was it just for a site disseminating?
Yeah, so it's called a network enforcement law, and it is actually very debated right now. It is going to become effective in October, and it has only been proposed and introduced in the summer by the Judiciary Minister Heike Maas himself. And what this Netzwerk-DG, as it's called in Germany, says is that social media companies would be liable for the content that is being hosted there. And they need to take down illegal content such as defamatory content, but also things like junk news within 24 hours, or otherwise they could be fined of up to 50 million euro as per piece of content, which obviously is a huge sum. And that's not just a huge sum for us, but that's also a huge sum for the Facebook and Twitters of the world. And so right now, what many people in Germany, including myself, are worrying is that creates problematic incentives for those companies to just take down whatever kind of content might be borderline problematic, to just avoid being fined 50 million euro. And who could blame them?
Yeah, 50 million probably isn't a big number in the scheme of things for one piece of content, but it's once you start adding up maybe 10 different pieces of news, and then all of a sudden it's at 500 million, and
Absolutely.
But the kind of implications of that is something I wanted to ask you about, and you kind of touched on it there, is that by putting that law into place, someone has to define what junk news is, and someone has to say what is true objectively and not.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't even think it's possible to know that within 24 hours. Like, say someone has
absolutely
it could be a leak from inside a government building that has only one, maybe two anonymous sources, and the real truth might not come out for months. Or Brett Weinstein, actually, that we did an interview with, touched on this, and he was talking about how do you legislate for that story that is way ahead of its time, or that story that, whilst being maybe demonstrably false in some of its premises, has a grain of truth that is more important than the things that it's got wrong. What do you think that? How do you see that going for? How do you see that sort of law moving forward?
I agree that it's super problematic, and that those kind of decisions to say this content is defamatory or this content should be considered illegal, that is something that traditionally in the German law system and in the law system worldwide was just that. It was treated by the law system. So in courts, with the judges, with the lawyers, debated for weeks, if not months. And now you have a social media company who is by no means a legal entity that now should make those decisions within 24 hours. So I think that's highly problematic, and that is just a recipe for making false judgments here, and also judgments from a cooperation and not from a court.
How would you suggest we deal with the issue moving forwards? Like, what would you suggest?
To deal with this problem of computational propaganda. I think we need more transparency on what actually is going on, because research like ours is using whatever data is public, and we can already tell it is a big problem that is happening internationally with fast dynamics. But I do think we don't have enough insight into what is actually happening to really address that with regulations, to really address that with educational measures and suggestions and how countermeasures should look like. But I do think with computational propaganda potentially getting better, if you want to say so, in the next couple of years as technology is progressing, we will have to see a mixture of educating the public that this is happening, and that they need to maybe be more skeptical and critical of information online, and maybe also go back to trusting established publishers a little more than they are doing at the moment. I think we will also see regulation, and hopefully regulation that is a little more sophisticated and less overbearing than the German law. I do think we need social network companies to step up, share the data, increase transparency, and do what they can do best, which is also working on technological solutions to this issue, on automated flagging, on automated bot detection. They have great engineers for that. They are the absolute leaders in machine learning approaches right now. And I do think that it's important for them to also engage in these sort of activities.
You mentioned there about people having to trust established news outlets, and that's something I think is a problematic suggestion.
Absolutely.
Because just speaking from my own UK perspective, I have very little reason to trust most of what you would call traditional news brands. Even the BBC, who are generally pretty good on nearly everything, they've been quite poor recently. There seems to be more and more of a revolving door between the BBC head reporters and the Conservative Party in the UK, and to me, it just feels like it's, I don't know. I feel that the reason that people are turned away from those news brands is because they've become perhaps a bit biased, perhaps a little bit selective in what they report. And I feel that it shouldn't be on the users to be pushed to trust things, and that people should trust things and then be pushed towards it by their own desire to get the best reporting. And I think that there's a really big problem in the way we kind of suggest that people need to trust more traditional news brands, and I think they maybe need to earn that trust back. I just wanted to get your thoughts on that particular idea.
No, I think I maybe I didn't phrase my choice of words carefully enough. What I do think is problematic is that when we're labeling outlets like CNN as fake news CNN, or when we're thinking that outlets like it absolutely is, or when we're saying BBC is conspirational, I do think that those kind of approaches, and this really maybe what goes beyond a curious and educated skepticism of where you're saying, I have noticed that some of this reporting may have been a little bit biased and maybe also not as high quality as I would have wanted it. But I think the difference is that those professional publishers are trying to be transparent in the way that they are doing reporting, in the way that they are giving information, and also in the way that they are doing fact checking. That is something that I want to say on this. And I think that if we continue to be super skeptical, however, of those established publishers to a way that is thinking of them as conspirational actors, really, then this introduces this entire fake news scene and debate. This introduces the alternative facts debate and alternative media debates. And I think that is really a rabbit hole that is dangerous. And trust me, trust when it's coming from me. I've been looking into junk news sources for the past couple of weeks, really in the thousands, and there is so much dangerous reporting out there that is so much about alternative facts, and that is downright false and hateful and conspirational, and to an extent that is really just shocking. And so maybe that's why my judgment is maybe it wouldn't be so bad to trust those established medias a little more than some people are doing right now. And just also to say that again, I do think it's important to be critical and to be skeptical to an extent that is stemming from education and from knowledge, but not from fear and from fears of conspiration.
Yeah, I think the answer really, as in most things, is educate yourself and, make sure you're checking your sources, make sure you're checking different stories across multiple different outlets to get a real picture of what's going on rather than just trusting one blindly,
Yes, absolutely.
But yeah, I will let you go. Thanks very much for chatting to us. It was a real pleasure to get to even just look through some of your research. I'll put some of the
thank you. I'm glad you find it interesting.
To what I have got in the description below about the German and US elections and anything else that you want to send over.
Great. Thank you. I will do.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you very much, Lisa.
Bye, Josh.
Bye. Thanks very much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, you can share us on Facebook, Twitter, tell your friends about us. That's how we grow. Coming up soon for you, we have an interview with Dr. Katie Hayward from Queen's Policy Unit. She'll be talking to us about the Brexit border issue. And later in the month, we actually have interviews that we've just confirmed with Harry Baker, the world champion slam poet, and with Richard Barbrook, who is working with the Labour Party on a lot of digital direct democracy. So make sure you subscribe if you want to get those when they come out. Until next time, thanks for listening.